Good morning to you all. I'm very pleased to be with you once again because I find this a very useful and informative experience. As in previous years, the panel of speakers you've assembled today are experts in a variety of fields, but particularly in exploring how parents and education systems can work together and work better as well. For me, one of the highlights of last year's conference was Dr. Joyce Epstein's presentation about partnership schools, for those of you who were here last year. And I'm pleased that her ideas didn't depart when she returned to the United States. After this morning's session, I'm delighted to be launching Partnership Schools in Ireland, a joint initiative between the National Parents Council and the IPPN. I know you'll hear more. Thank you. Sorry, my apologies. I know that you'll hear more about this initiative later, but it's great for me to see the connection between a speaker at an event one year directly leading to the launch of a new initiative 1 year later. And this year, I hope we'll have the opportunity to learn similarly from John Sherry and from Charles, and thank you, Charles, for that really effective and informative intervention. I also want to recognise in the audience the President of the INTO, Sean McMahon. I think it's the first time that the INTO has come to such an event, and I hope it'll be a mandatory requirement for your successors to be here as well. Likewise, Micheál O'Grifa. Am I right in thinking, Micheál, that it's the first time for the National Teaching Council to be here? We have 87,000 registered teachers in the primary and post-primary sector for just under 1 million pupils, give or take. And I hope that the Teaching Council will move to the point where, in order to teach in a school that is supported by the taxpayers' monies, which is effectively 99.9% of all our schools, you'll have to maintain a level of professional competence, continuous professional development. And that continual professional development will address many of the issues that we all learn, because none of us can assume that what we learned in college, whatever that happened to be, will be fit for purpose in 10, 15, 20 or 30 years. And yet, sadly, some people do believe that what they learnt in college was sufficient for them to do so. So you're very, very welcome. And of course, Seán Fowlul, the Secretary General of the Department for Education and Skills, is here, and Margaret Condon from the Inspector. I think Charles Heaslip has been here on previous occasions as well. Your annual conference is a very welcome opportunity for me to acknowledge the role of the National Parents Council. The Council, put simply, is an invaluable advocate for parents and guardians of young people, and we've just seen some very compelling evidence of just how positive that is. I would like to take this opportunity again to commend the Council for your work in supporting parents in the primary sector. As I have said before, since taking office, I have found your organisation to be of immense value in helping transform our education system. You have helped us work to tackle the cost of school books and uniforms for parents. You've stood alongside us as we seek ways to eliminate the scourge of bullying from our schools. And you are contributing to making school admissions more open, fair and transparent. Next week, you will also be facilitating information sessions for parents on the introduction of the Junior Cycle Students Awards, the JCSA. And the change in the title is important. It's not the exam results. It's the Junior Cycle Student Award, and it will encompass things that aren't currently measured as we speak today. You've also helped greatly with the development of an education passport and our thinking in relation to parents and students' charters, two areas I will come back to in a moment. As equal partners in the education system, you have shown a great attention to education policy in areas that will make a real difference to the lives of our children and their parents. Much of the work that you've undertaken this year has been in cooperation with your sister organisation at post-primary level, and I'd like to acknowledge Don Myers, who's in the audience here, from the post-primary second level. I'm happy to announce today that your colleagues in the National Parents Council post-primary will very shortly appoint a full-time executive officer. This will enable them to cooperate even more with National Council's primary across a range of areas. And just as Anya has done terrific work in building this organisation, I look forward to seeing a similar strengthening of the National Council's Council at post-primary level over the next few years. One of the areas I want to focus on today is the Education Passport, which has recently been published by the NCCA. And let me tell you why this came about and how it came about. After I was appointed by Eamon Gilman in opposition to take on the role of education, a subject about which I felt very passionate because I grew up in that kind of disputatious house to which Charles referred. And my father was one refrain, a man of many opinions of his own, with 5 sons and 1 daughter who had escaped by virtue of her age. As we were eating each other alive, he would say to my older brothers, I was in the middle of the 5, let him finish. And the subtext then was, and when he has then made a complete idiot of himself, you can tear him apart. And it was, I tell you, it was one way to learn how to survive. I met with about 7 principals of inner city Dublin post-primary schools. And this was when I was in opposition. And they said, you know, we really know very little about the kids who come into our schools. Some schools had feeder schools, primary, others didn't. And they said to me that the very weak child and the very bright child will very quickly manifest themselves. But the 80% of the rest of us kind of glide through. And don't forget, you that have, you know, 4th class and 5th class and 6th class kids, they go from being in a classroom where the teacher is with them most of the time, but not all the time, depending on the size of the school, where they, on the hour, every hour or 40 minutes, they change from one class to another. It's like moving from a small corner shop into a shopping mall. The bells ring in mayhem in the corridors, and they go into another classroom. The teacher has them for one subject. They may have 2 subjects, depending on the size of the school. And it can be Easter before the 80% of the cohort of young first years actually display their abilities or their lack of abilities or their weaknesses. And what those people said to me about 5 years ago now was, if we only knew more about the pupils coming into the classroom, we could intervene much more quickly, and we would be able to actually find out where their weaknesses are, or if we could talk to their parents, but not every parent talks to them. So the passport, and you'll get copies of it after this session in the afternoon, I think, is basically, first of all, it's the achievements that the school will assess of your child. And it's yours, and it's your child's. And if you're going to a 2nd level school, the school cannot ask for that passport until they've decided to offer you a place or not. In other words, they can't cherry pick bright kids. But there's a lovely additional to it, which is not my idea, but I warmly welcome it. And that is, I think it came from the NCCA, the parent's additional assessment of their child, because the parent has them at home much longer than the teacher has them in the class. So that's an additional observation by the parent. And the last one, which I really like very much, is the child's assessment of themselves. I'm actually good at this, or I like doing that, etc. So that package will now travel with the 500 and, well, not the 520,000 primary school kids, but that 6th class, 1/8 of the total, who will cross the threshold. It's been rolled out this year. It will be compulsory from next year for every school. And we have 3,200 primary schools for every school to roll out. So I would suggest on you that perhaps a dialogue with the various primary schools around the country to facilitate them. This is either a great liberation for the child, or, as some people in the teachers' trade union movement, another imposition of an endless task that has to be done. In fact, the information is already there. It's really just collating it and assuming it. So why is your work important? I'm well aware of the importance of parents working with their children in order to achieve the best possible learning outcomes, and we've had some very cogent argument presented and evidence presented to us today. I'm glad that you're focused for this conference, and we all need to preserve our high hopes. Children learn more from their parents in their first 5 years than they do from their schools in the next 10. But equally, children do better in school when their parents work with those schools and with their children. I'm interested in our hopes and ambitions for our children from both of these perspectives. The importance of parental involvement in their schools' education, in children's education, is a universally accepted fact. Researchers report that parent participation has benefits for children on many fronts, including self-esteem, academic achievement, and parent-child relationships. The benefits for parents themselves include positive attitudes to school and a better understanding of the schooling process. The Irish Constitution, which was signed off by the citizens of this republic in 1937, recognises the primary role of parents as the educator of the children, the primary role. However, there's very little mention of parents in the subsequent legislation to give effect to that recognition in the Constitution. The 1998 Education Act, which brought most of the previous legislation or non-legislation or practice together, recognises the contribution parents make in the delivery of education. The Education Passport seeks to empower parents with information and involve them in supporting their child through a difficult transition. But this is just one way in which we can empower parents to become more active partners in the education of their children. I believe we need to look at how a stronger culture of valuing parental involvement can be created. We have to find ways of increasing parental involvement in all aspects of their children's education. To this end, I'm delighted to speak about our plans for the creation of a Parents and Students Charter when addressing the Easter conferences. It is an issue on which the National Parents' Council have been campaigning for some time. I've said before that I believe we need to have a fresh look at certain aspects of the 1998 Education Act. It is 16 years since its enactment, and we need to take stock on how its intent has in fact been fulfilled. The environment has dramatically changed since 1998. In 1998, there was no National Education Welfare Board. There was no Council for Special Education, no Ombudsman for Children, and no Equality Tribunal. The government has recently approved the drafting of an Admissions to School bill, a bill which will address some of the deficiencies exposed by Section 29 of the Education Act. I mention it today because I intend to include an amendment to Section 28 of the Act as part of the final bill. This will provide the legislative underpinning for a Parents and Students Charter. The purpose of the Charter is to strengthen the position of parents within the school system and to bring about a culture change in how schools involve parents and students. To bring about a culture change about how schools involve parents. And let me just tell you an anecdote from about 5 weeks ago. I was opening a school, lovely joyous event, an extension to a school outside Maynooth. And afterwards, when it was all over, this number of people were queuing to talk to me, etc. And this woman presented. And she was shaking. And I said, look, we won't talk here. And we went across to a quiet space. She had travelled for about 2 hours from another part of the country. She had 4 children, one in post-primary school, 3 in a primary school. Her children were being bullied, badly bullied. I don't know the reason why. It doesn't matter. Bullying is bullying, whatever the reason, and there's no justification. She had gone to the principal and was ignored. She had gone to the chairman of the Board of Management and was ignored. And she had gone to the Catholic bishop, and there's nothing unique in that. They are the patrons of 95% of all of our schools at primary level for historical reasons. She had no voice. She had no voice. And she was an emotional wreck, an emotional wreck. She has taken her children out of that school, but she still has no voice. With the Charter, she would have a voice and would have the support system to back it up. I don't know what damage has been done to the parental relationship with those children, but I know it's not a normal and happy place. And undoing that damage and repairing it is going to take a lot of time. So this is why this has to happen. And yes, it will be a cultural change, because some parents are very difficult. They're very difficult with their own children, they're very difficult in their own relationship, and they can be hell for some teachers, as Sean McMahon no doubt can testify. But that's not an excuse for not giving parents a voice. And that's not a justification for being able legally to ignore parents. And that is the reality at the moment. So it's going to change. It's going to change. And I want your input in it, because we've got to change the culture, not just change the law. Changing the law reflects a change in the culture. And indeed, the culture has to, in effect, move first before the law gives it statutory provision. Now, it's a two-way engagement, but I think it's something that we need to do. And that's why your involvement and the recognition here in the front row of your importance, and I mention them not just because I work with them and I admire them, but because it is testimony to the fact that the parent's voice has come of age. It will be strengthened with the full-time CEO at post-primary level. It will be strengthened in the context of the admissions bill for schools. And it will be strengthened in the reality, if ever proof was needed. But I knew long before I heard the statistics from Charles that not only are you the natural primary educators of your children, you have an incredibly powerful role to play, that will make the teaching of those children in the classroom a much easier task for the teachers than children coming from families that are struggling for all the reasons that we know about. So I'm hoping that that will be something that we can build upon. It will be reflected in legislation, and it will be reflected in the other things that we do. And I want again to thank you for your input in relation to asking schools to consult with you about a uniform policy. That caused, I can tell you, it was like the end of civilization for some schools were concerned, that parents would actually have a say. In most cases, in fact, the status quo maintained. Most parents wanted the uniform. And the teachers sort of said, well, look, I told you so. We didn't need to do it. We knew that. It's the very recognition of the right of parents to be asked in the first instance. And likewise, the weight of books. And we'll talk about that maybe on another day. I'm going to finish with a story of an encounter on the same day that I was in Maynooth. I was in Newbridge, beautiful, beautiful St. Conleth's Primary School. And I was asked to speak. There was a junior and a senior school, and I was asked to speak to the senior school from 7 years of age up. Now, politicians love making speeches, but you don't speak to kids like the way you might speak to others. So I started asking them questions. The forest of hands went up. And one question was, why do we have to do homework? And I looked at them, I looked across at the teachers, and what rang in my ears was the words of wisdom from Sean Cottrell, whom you know, many of you, the Irish Primary Principals Network. And he offered this observation, which I carefully tailored, but I'll give you the Cottrell version. Why do we give children homework? Is it to remind most of them on a daily basis of how inadequate they are? And the other side that I did offer to the kids was most parents would be horrified if teachers didn't give homework. So I sort of tailored my remarks to the audience that was in front of me. And I skipped over it. And I said, well, what kind of homework would you like if you had to have homework? And again, there was a flurry of hands. And I picked one, and he says, could we play video games on our iPads? And you know what? That's what the homework's going to be in 10 years' time. That's what it's going to be. And when they've finished it, they'll press send, and the teacher, very overworked teacher, will actually have a computer program that will evaluate the results and not have to correct it. It will actually come out in terms of literacy. So that's the exciting future that we're looking at. Technology will change the way things are done, but not why they should be done. And that's why your role and your massive increase in numbers here today is such a delight to see so many people here and to see you so engaged. Thank you very much.